what would love to talk to you about today is kind of coming from a little bit from where I sit. I sit, as Matt said, both between kind of the world of research and implementation, but also I'm a sociologist who studies economics and come with sort of some big questions around what are the narratives that inform a lot of um, our economic policy and how we interpret data. And I want to talk about this in the context of guaranteed income. So if we look at and we think about the kinds of questions and narratives and how those inform how we think about what data we're going to collect, but also how we ask and think about the analysis and the questions that we ask of the data, it starts to become a little bit clearer. Some of what we've seen in some of the other talks just in this past half an hour, where we might be going wrong in some of these places. So I'm going to quickly run through guaranteed income, kind of what it is, make sure everyone's on the same page about this as a policy, and then to ask some questions about each of the different stages of data analysis, thinking about some examples from the guaranteed income space and ways that interrogating how we're asking, what we're asking, and the sense that we make of that data changes a little bit how we look at the outcomes. And one of the key pieces here is thinking about in the US context in particular, I'm speaking, interrogating some of the long-standing historical narratives that exist about social policy. All right, so to give you a quick overview of guaranteed income, it's essentially unconditional cash. In the case of the pilots that I've been evaluating, it's cash provided to families monthly, anywhere between 12 and 24 months. We've been doing evaluations at APT for 8 different pilots across the country, and with participants in the program of anywhere between around 110 to somewhere around 250 participants in each program. Each of those participants gets a monthly cash payment anywhere between $330 and $1,000 a month. So in some cases, quite sort of substantial. And for some of those families, that's doubling their regular income. We did different kinds of evaluation. I just want to make sure it's clear. There was mixed methods research happening here where we were collecting both survey data from the participants who were in the treatment group and those who were in the control group, as well as doing interviews with participants. So we could begin to interrogate what we're understanding from the survey data and what we're understanding from those interviews. And a large part of the effort, both in the work that we are doing, but also in the broader movement in the US and understanding the outcomes from guaranteed income, is really to interrogate some of the US narratives that exist about welfare receipt. Those narratives being that people who receive welfare are lazy, that they work less, and that receiving cash on a monthly basis is going to increase dependency on the state. Right, so we're sort of looking at to think about how do we take apart some of those narratives as we understand what happens as people receive cash. So in the context of thinking about this and thinking about the data and the questions that we ask, I want to start with just thinking about the very act of collecting data. It's dependent on us asking what questions we ask. We have to make decisions all the time as researchers about what questions we're going to ask in the survey. What questions are we going to ask in the interviews? And one of the key elements here that for me kind of raises some big flags for us to be thinking critically, right, about these hard facts that come out about results on a guaranteed income or other places, is what we saw in our surveys was we didn't ask any questions about parenting in our surveys. That was a big gap for us as we got into the space of doing the analysis and interviewing participants. Participants talked all the time about parenting and how important receiving cash was for them to be able to have time to parent, but not just that, to be able to parent in the way that was meaningful to them. They could go out and they could buy that little candy. They could say yes instead of no all the time. They were able to spend a little bit less time working so that they could show up at the school. They could show up at sports events. They could show up as parents in the way that they wanted to and the parents that they wish to be.
30 seconds.
Oh no. Okay. So that's a key point that I want to kind of make really clear here. The structure of the questions that we ask. Then the analysis that we do. Over the course of the research, we have seen that on average, we're looking at results on average across the field in the guaranteed income field. But as we started to dig in on some subgroups, we started to see differences for different ages, right? For families working in one of our pilots, we saw for those participants, cash helped reduce the barriers to employment. But for older families, they started to drop out of the workforce to deal with health problems that they were experiencing, right? So again, the questions in the subgroups that we look at matter for how we understand what the research is going to say. And then finally, my final point
Hi,
in the slide.
everybody. We should be wrapping up and transitioning in the next few minutes to
Okay,
the team
Ignore
project
that voice.
right.
rooms.
So
Keep
If
going.
you need any help,
my
let us
very
know in
last
the
point
main
is then
session.
how do we
Thank you.
make sense of the results, right? So a recent review of four large RCTs or randomized controlled trials that were done at guaranteed income pilots noted that there was no meaningful financial change for families. However, they did save between $800 and $2,000 on average across these pilots. Now, the interpretation of that as not meaningful change for those families is coming from the perspective of a particular economist versus a participant who may be living in incredible scarcity and where $800 in the bank is a lifeline to be able to pay for a car tire repair or car repair, to be able to have some extra money to get food on the table for their kids. So how we make sense of those results is also really important. And incorporating and having participant voice at the center of that is really critical to being able to, I think, understand how we make policy work for people.